Yes, it's time for Luke chapter 23. And this is filled with interesting stuff, I'm telling you. You might think, well, this is the passion narrative. I know that like the back of my hand. Well, not necessarily. We always have this tendency to meld all the gospels together. So we think we know what happens next because we remember it from this or that gospel. But there are a number of surprising possibilities that come up in this one, and a lot of it has to do with what I theorize was one of these second century chastity stories, a kind of a discipleship paradigm or a recruitment model for women to renounce any kind of sexual involvement, to take a pledge for voluntary celibacy, and that you'll recall the basic plot of this, which appears like clockwork in all the second century apocryphal acts of the apostles, Thomas, John, Peter, Paul, Matthias, and so forth. It's like they all just took the same plot and changed the names, or as elite stuffed shirt literary critics would say, they have exactly the same syntagmic axis, the plot logic line, but they vary the paradigmatic axis, which is basically the drop down menu. How do you want to fill in the blanks today? And in this thing, that a woman hears the apostle preaching the Encretite gospel of salvation through celibacy, etc. And needless to say, their men, husbands, fiancés, whatever, are pretty steamed about this, right? And so they happen to be connected with some official, a king, a local governor, whatever, doesn't matter much, and says, hey, look, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but we've got some kind of charlatan gigolo running around convincing our wives not to sleep with us anymore. These guys are homewreckers, probably just making a harem out of these women. Mine's not the only case. Can't you do something about this? Family values and all that. And the king, governor, whatever, says, "Yeah, you're right. I'll look into it." And he then sends some goons to arrest the apostle for this, and he's imprisoned. And meanwhile, the women are visiting him in jail, bringing him anything he wants, food and all that stuff, until finally he is convicted and killed. And then there may even be a resurrection or ascension or one or another kind of solution. And I think that Luke employs one more version of this, a chastity story, not of Thecla or Mygdonia or Maximilla, the heroines of these other ones, but of Joanna. What do we know about her? She only appears in the Gospel of Luke. She is said to be the wife of Chusa, who was either a boyhood chum of Herod Antipas, Tetrarch of Galilee, or his steward who managed the affairs of his estate, or both, very likely. And what is she doing? She's among the women who follow Jesus and pay the bills for him and his disciples for food and lodging and so on. So she and the other women have abandoned their home and husbands if they had them, and we know Joanna did. It says so explicitly, and we know that Herod is looking to kill Jesus. So that's why some Pharisees come to him and say, look, you better get out of town because he's gunning for you. Doesn't say why, but I think in the original Joanna story, it was made absolutely clear. And then we're going to see in Luke 23 that Jesus is on trial before Herod, not in any other gospel. And that, let's see, his soldiers mock him and all this sort of thing. And then Joanna is there again with the holy women at the tomb and so forth. They're ready to anoint him. Well, I think that, and there's also a reference to the daughters of Jerusalem, a phrase that also occurs in Ezekiel referring to the devotees of Tammuz, a dying and rising god. And so I think that that is used in here, and that explains a few Lucan peculiarities or things unique to him. And also, there is another little bit of this puzzle is that in the Gospel of Marcion, which I think has been redacted into canonical Luke, one of the charges against Jesus is that he deceives our women and children. Now that's gone from Luke. Why is that? Well, he's writing from a later standpoint where Encretism is considered heresy, and that's too much of a hint of it. But that sure explains why Herod is after him, and so on. So let's keep that stuff in mind. And that's not the only interesting surprise in this. So 23:1. Now you remember Jesus has stood trial before the Sanhedrin, and they've gotten enough evidence, they think, to accuse him of blasphemy and such. Okay, 23:1. Then the whole company of them arose, the Sanhedrin, and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man perverting our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king." Well, of course, that's the forbidding paying taxes to Caesar. That's just an outright lie. You'd think these guys are like a prototype for politicians in our day. And let's see, the idea of him being the perverter of the nations, that has the ring to it of the kind of thing in the Talmud where it mentions Jesus as a deceiver of Israel. And it seems slightly anachronistic to me because it doesn't even say what it was supposed to be that he said that was perverting the people. I think it's just shorthand for he started Christianity. Okay, and it did say he was deceiving our wives and children, or women and children. Same word in Greek anyway, gune. Okay, and did he say that he's a king? Well, they took it that way, but Jesus' answer was equivocal. And if you want proof of that, you'll see it in a minute. And Pilate asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered him, "You have said so." Like, it's kind of like back in a previous presidential campaign. That's what you're saying, George Bush. That's not what I'm saying. It's equivocal, right? And how do we know that? And Pilate said to the chief priests and the multitudes, "I find no crime in this man." But they were urgent, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." How could Pilate say, "There's nothing wrong with this guy"? If Jesus had just admitted, yeah, I'm the king, got more claim to it than you do. I mean, if that's what Jesus' reply, I'm sorry, if that's what his reply meant, then how could Pilate possibly say, "Oh, he's not guilty of your charges"? What did he think? Jesus said he was king, but was lying to him in order to get crucified? No, obviously, it's at least equivocal. Well, that's your words, not mine. And so they're taking it in the invidious way. He's a revolutionist, and I don't see that from what he says to me. Now here we have Luke patch in a piece of the passion narrative as it appeared in the Joanna story. Because in the other gospels, Herod Antipas doesn't appear at this point at all, right? Jesus is mocked by the soldiers of Pilate, and so on and so on. But suddenly we jump the track and we're in Herod here. When Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time for the Passover. Right? When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long come on, page. He long desired to see him. Whoops. And we know why that is, according to the pattern of the chastity stories, right? Oh, this is that troublemaker I've been looking for. Because he had heard about him and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. Walk across my swimming pool, right? And that probably had something to do in his mind with how Jesus, if he were a charlatan and a gigolo, was deceiving people to follow him or to sleep with him, as they no doubt suspected, right? Okay, verse 9. So he questioned him. Excuse me. At some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by, vehemently accusing him. And Herod, with his soldiers, treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then, arraying him in gorgeous apparel, what would you think naturally comes next? They send him out to be crucified, and Herod Antipas would have, right? That's what this leads to. We know that because the same stuff is said in Mark that the soldiers of Pilate did, Roman soldiers, and this was all leading up to the crucifixion. Well, my thinking is that originally in the Joanna story, it did also. It was just that it was Herod Antipas who was having him killed. But he's got to Luke has to patch this in with Mark. He doesn't want to leave out either one. So he has Herod at the last minute say, well, I guess we've had our fun. He's harmless. Send him back to Pilate. Wait a second. Not only did the trajectory really demand that this issue in Herod crucifying him, but if Herod let him go and said, hey, he's done nothing, why would he send him back to Pilate? Isn't he free to go in that case? That's simply the result of this kind of clumsy patching in of a piece of the Joanna chastity story. To leave that in, God knows why, and then to go back to Mark, where it's going to be Pilate who condemns him. Okay, arraying him in gorgeous apparel, he sent him back to Pilate, and Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for before this they had been at enmity with each other. Where does he get that? Well, in the book of Acts, which again is by the same guy, right, we hear that when the apostles are persecuted, arrested, and persecuted by the Sanhedrin. Let's see. Yeah, it's in Acts 4. Let's just start with verse 23 there. When they were released, they went to their friends and reported that the chief priests and the elders had what they had said to them to stop preaching. And when they heard it, they lifted their voices together to God and that Son, Lord, who didst make the heavens and the earth and the sea, everything in them, who by the mouth of our father David, thy servant, did say by the Holy Spirit, and then he quotes Psalm number 2, why did the Gentiles rage and the peoples imagine vain things? They're cooking up these plans that'll come to nothing. The kings of the earth set themselves in array, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his anointed. End quote. For truly in this city there were gathered together against thy holy servant Jesus, whom thou didst anoint, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do whatever thy hand and thy plan had predestined to take place, and so forth. What do you know? Herod is included in the Passion narrative as a kind of a look back at it, only by Luke, the same author. Nobody else knows anything about it. And I'm guessing he decided to use the Joanna material, where it was Herod Antipas that tried him, and not Pilate. No need for that in the Joanna story. He wants to combine the two, and so he. Why didn't he just choose one or the other? Well, because he had this passage in mind from Psalm 2: more than one king. So the emperor's representative, Pilate, the Roman procurator, conspired with Herod to put Jesus to death, even though in Luke 23, they actually don't, right? Neither one of them wants to execute Jesus, though Pilate finally gives in, as we'll see in a moment, and does send him to the cross, but not Herod. He doesn't conspire to kill Jesus. Luke apparently didn't quite notice that. And so by the time of Acts 4, Herod is trying to get Jesus dead and succeeds with his bosom buddy, Pontius Pilate. The apocryphal tradition really took off at this point and began fabricating things like the letter of Pilate to Herod and various other Pilate apocrypha involving Herod. And so this has the whiff of that already starting. This novelistic, almost fairy tale-ish note that Pilate being leagued against Jesus, at least in some vague way, made them buddies. They had been having probably jurisdictional issues before, right? That, hey, you can't do that. You're Rome's representative, but still, I am the tetrarch. Oh yeah, well, I'm afraid Rome is more authoritative than you. Well, this time, Pilate is shown trying to head that off by saying, if he's a Galilean, I may be asking for trouble if I execute one of his subjects. So why not send him to him, and that'll wash my hands of it. But it doesn't quite work that way. And so it seems kind of apocryphal stuff to me. Okay, so Herod's out of the picture now. And in Luke 23:13, Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, you brought me this man as one who was perverting the people, and after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither did Herod, for he sent him back to us. If he didn't find him guilty, why did he send him back? Well, just so Luke can put them both in. I will therefore chastise him and release him. In other words, have him whipped and then let him go. That ought to do the trick. Sounds an awful lot like Josephus's account of the trial and flogging of Jesus ben Ananias, before some years before the Roman siege of Jerusalem, which he predicted, and he was killed during it. Really startling parallels between that story and any of the gospel gospel passion narratives. So I'm going to release him. But verse 18, they all cried out together, away with who's the all, by the way? Do we have a crowd of local rowdies here, as in the other gospels? It doesn't say that. The only possible antecedent is the representatives of the Sanhedrin, the priests and the scribes, and so on. They all cried out together, presumably, not the general populace, if that's what the crowd in Matthew and Mark are intending, but not here. I mean, you really have to read that in if you want to make the massive crowd howling for the blood of Jesus. In Luke, it doesn't say that. Away, they all cried out together, away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection started in the city and for murder. Now, why would he be doing this? Well, if you probably have a footnote in your Bible too, that there's a verse 17 that I didn't read, right? Now he was obliged to release one man to them at the festival. That most likely was not in Luke. Some scribe said, hey, wait a minute. Why do they think they can get away with asking him to let somebody else go? How does Barabbas figure into this? Well, if he was given him the choice of somebody to be freed, because it was a custom of Roman clemency at the Passover to do this, well, that at least explains why this guy, don't you want the other one? Why would that even be an issue unless that was some kind of custom? Though we have no other evidence that the Romans ever did that, it seems inherently unlikely. And there certainly is nothing stated here that would explain why, take your pick, what prisoners behind door number 1 and which one's behind door number 2. Take your pick. It doesn't make any sense. And so Pilate understands Jesus to be innocent, but Barabbas doesn't tell you that, right? That's only in Matthew. Why are they asking for Barabbas, a convicted killer of Romans, apparently, because it happens in an insurrection that had just occurred? Is it possible Pilate would say, what the heck? Why would they want Barabbas released? It's not clear to me why the Sanhedrin would have any interest in that. They weren't trying to antagonize Rome. They wouldn't ask for a guy who was a known anti-Roman killer, right? So what is this? Why is Barabbas in here? Why is it an option to release him at all? And so forth. Well, I think that. Let's just read a little bit more. Pilate addressed them once more, verse 20, desiring to release Jesus. But they shouted out, crucify, crucify him. A third time he said to them, why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no crime deserving death. I will therefore chastise him and release him. But they were urgent, demanding with loud voices that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave sentence that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, whom they asked for, but Jesus he delivered up to their will. This is almost inexplicable. I mean, if they actually had this clemency custom, that would at least have some logic to it. but it just is so implausible. There's no reason for it in Luke, right? But though some scribe has decided, well, let's add that back in verse 17, right? But even there, it's a kind of summary statement, as if written by a guy who's just trying to do what I just said. He's trying to fill up a gap with a little note. It's not even as explicit as it is in Mark and Matthew. So what's the whole Barabbas thing doing in there? Well, I think that I think of the Reimarus Eisler Brandon theory that Jesus was a zealot revolutionary, and that Luke is trying to cover that up. That's the whole theory, right? After the Jesus revolution failed, the movement didn't die. They just did the same thing that the Sanhedrin did after the Roman defeat. They formed a new Sanhedrin that was purely religious. They had no political aims. I'm saying the same thing would have happened with the Jesus movement. And the punchline I've been getting to is that I think that originally in the story, Jesus was the one jailed for insurrection, and the insurrection was the temple cleansing. And so that, and it was a bigger deal than the gospel descriptions of the cleansing of the temple let on, right? They tend to minimize the scope and the size of it and the reason for it. And let's see. So I think what they ascribed to Barabbas was the actual charge against Jesus. And they're trying to get rid of it by saying, no, that was somebody else. That there's been some kind of case of mistaken identity or something. And that Pilate did figure Jesus had done something worthy of crucifixion, and so he didn't hesitate. But the idea that no less than 3 times Pilate says, look, I've exonerated this guy. There's no reason to think he did anything, but just to get you out of my hair, I'll go ahead and have him put to death anyway, even if it means freeing a known killer of Romans. So I think you've got the original grounds for crucifixion. Then that's ascribed to somebody else, so they get that out of the way, and have Pilate, with utter implausibility, saying, okay, well, in that case, I'll just condemn this innocent man to death. Satisfied? Another problem, would Pilate let him, from what we know about him, he was an anti-Semite who outraged Jews every chance he got. He's going to let himself be pushed around by, in the other Gospels, the crowds, in this one, the Sanhedrin. No, come on. I mean, that's a sign of weakness that you're not going to come back from. Oh, this guy is susceptible to being pushed around. Let's remember that. Okay, now Simon of Cyrene. 26, and as they led him away, they seized one Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, and laid on him the cross to carry it behind Jesus. Now the multitude comes in, and they weren't said to be party to the howling mob business, but now the multitude comes in, and they're big fans of Jesus. They don't turn against him here, right? Remember where everybody stood. The Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, scribes, etc., wanted to arrest Jesus and have him killed, but on the sly, because if the people knew about this, they'd be after them, right? So they are not party to this. And when they do appear, they're saying, what happened? Why is Jesus going to the cross? How'd this happen? But they couldn't do anything about it because they didn't want to end up on a bunch of other crosses beside him. Followed him a great multitude of people and of women who bewailed and lamented him. Why only women wailing and lamenting? Well, that's because that was their job in ancient Judea. Remember in the thing about the children quarreling over what game to play, the boys wanted to imitate their fathers who danced at weddings publicly. Couples did not dance, and the girls wanted to play funeral because their mothers would mourn and weep at public funerals, but the men would not. They have to keep the stoic, stiff upper lip there. So it's the daughters of Jerusalem, the women, who lamented him. 28, but Jesus, turning to them, said, Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For behold, the days are coming when they will say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never gave suck. Then they will begin to say to the mountains, Fall on us, and to the hills, Cover us. For if they do this when the wood is green, what will happen when it is dry and flammable? Right? That's right now. Things are relatively calm, but in a generation from now, when your children are grown up and in your position, they'll be weeping and wailing at their own misfortune because, as Luke has intimated, the Romans are going to destroy this place and you with it. For the moment, it's just me. But you just forget that. I mean, your own fate is going to be worse than this. Needless to say, this is only in Luke, right? This is unique stuff for him. 32, two others also who were criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place which is called the Skull, like the Red Skull, the one in Captain America or Klaus Schwab, take your pick. The place when they came to the place which is called the Skull, there they crucified him, and the criminals, one on the right and one on the left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Well, some manuscripts have that, some don't. And who knows why? But you got to factor in that in the book of Acts, what is it, chapter 6, I think, Stephen, who is made to kind of be modeled on Jesus, he says he's about to get stoned to death, and he says, Father, do not hold this sin against them. And I think James the Just says the same thing in another non-canonical book when he's about to be lynched. So he says that, and you're going to hear more about this in the book of Acts, even besides Stephen, because you will have the idea that the apostles preach to the crowd and say, I know you had Jesus crucified unwittingly, and in the sense you didn't know what you were really doing there. So God allows for repentance. Okay. And they cast lots to divide his garments. And we've seen that before. And it doesn't give you the Mark and reference back to Psalm 22, though Mark doesn't say that's what he's doing. But and the people stood by watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, notice it's just the rulers again, the Sanhedrinists, not the common people. They scoffed at him, saying, He saved others. Let him save himself if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one. The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him vinegar, saying, If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself. There was also an inscription over him. This is the king of the Jews. Some copies add it was written in the letters of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew, so any passerby could read it. They wanted people to know what the crucified were being executed for, because it's like, hey, take a lesson, folks. See this guy? He was an insurrectionist, or he was a runaway slave, or a thief. Those are the big crucifixion occasions. Don't you do the same thing unless you want to be up there one day. So it's, this placard would be above the head of the crucified. Okay, now we come to another juicy one. According to Mark and Matthew, the guys crucified alongside him joined in the mockery. And something to do, I guess, while you're dying. But here it's very different. One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? And we indeed justly. For we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." It's certainly possible somebody could say this, but you would think they would all maintain their innocence. Oh, we were framed up, but whatever. So he sympathizes with Jesus. He says, "I mean, at least we deserved what we got, but not him. Why are you mocking him?" Okay, and he said, 42, he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come in your kingdom," or kingly power, which is the idea. When you come to the throne, in other words. If he's king of the Jews, right? He's sort of saying in a, what would you say, comforting, affirming way. I'd say you are the king of the Jews, because you're certainly not a criminal, and when you'll receive your honors one day, and when you do, remember that I believed in you even at this 11th hour. Again, that's not in any other gospel. It seems obvious. It's an an insertion for Luke's apologetic agenda, right? There, he's very conscious that Romans are persecuting Christians because they say, "Well, they're a revolutionary sect. What do you want?" And Luke is saying, "Well, we're not anymore." And come to think of it, we never really were. Yeah, that's a ticket. It was all a frame up, which is why he has Pilate exonerate Jesus 3 times. Even though we can't deny that, the Romans crucified him. But even they admitted that he didn't deserve it and shouldn't have been crucified. And so this guy, who is admittedly a criminal himself, says, "Well, folks, readers, we deserve this, me and Gaius over here. But Jesus, no, he doesn't. What's wrong with this picture? Which one of these 3 doesn't belong? It's Jesus." And so the Roman reader is supposed to say, "Well, yeah, I guess he didn't deserve it. We got the wrong guy." And 43, and he said to him, "Truly, I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." Well, so much for the descent into hell, right? He says, "Look, I've heard what you're saying. You'll be rewarded for it. You and I together will go up to paradise, the abode of the just." Is that where he was during the 3 days? Was he only up there temporarily? And was this guy with him, like sort of Lazarus in the bosom of Abraham? Well, there's a bit of a problem with that. But for some reason, he seems to have lifted something from Diodorus Siculus, in other words, Diodorus of Sicily, a writer who has in a narrative a case where there is a slave who says he has been enslaved by people that didn't recognize him, I guess, if I remember this right, but that he doesn't deserve to be a slave. He was set up or whatever. And he's, let's see here, and a friendly person that knows this guy is not guilty. Let's see here. Wait a minute. Am I getting this mixed up? Okay, there's a guy with, I think it's this way, that there's a slave who has delusions of grandeur and says that he is a king or should be one, but it doesn't help him, and he's on his way to death. And this guy that sympathizes with him says, well, I support you. He says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's pretty odd to have happened twice, it seems to me. But Luke looks like he said, I like that, and borrowed it from this, but it introduces the big theological problem. Is Jesus just saying, well, you and I are going to go to heaven and receive our reward? What about the resurrection? It doesn't exactly fit that, or the idea that he was just dead for 3 days, but then snapped out of it. So it becomes kind of a mess, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because it's all the more fascinating trying to untangle all the threads here. Okay. In 44, it says, it was now about the 6th hour, that being noon, and there was darkness over the whole land. Or you could translate the whole earth. Who knows which he intended? Until the 9th hour, 3 p.m., while the sun's light failed. Or you could translate, the sun was eclipsed. Well, my guess is they're translating it, the sun's light failed, saying, well, a supernatural event might be a little hard for the reader to swallow. But on the other hand, anybody that keeps up with astronomy would know you cannot have a solar eclipse at Passover because of the full moon being visible. They can't happen at the same time. Who knows if Luke knew that? Okay, then Jesus, crying with a loud voice, said, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Huh? Is that what he said? Didn't he say, Father, my God, why have you forsaken me? What happened here? Well, that's obviously a case of trying to smooth things out for the reader, because even though this, like my God, why have you forsaken me, is a quote from the Psalms, it's not obvious to every reader, nor is it pointed out explicitly that my God, etc., was a scriptural quote. You just have to know it well enough to say, oh yeah, I know what he's doing there. If you didn't know that, you might think, oh man, this is really the low point for Jesus. He thinks God has abandoned him. Oh man. But that probably wasn't the point. You see, the Psalm 22 is one of these individual lament psalms that people would sing or pay to have sung for them in the temple when they were in a heap of trouble. And they've been praying, but no results so far. And so the person would be praying, God, why are you forsaking me? Why are you so reluctant to help me? And then he goes into various things, metaphors describing the extremity of his position. And toward the end, he says, but I haven't given up on you. I haven't lost faith. I know that somehow at the 11th hour, maybe you will intervene and save me. And when you do, I promise I will return here with a thank offering, with enough food offered to feed whoever is here at the time. And we'll all dedicate the feast to you who delivers the helpless. So, if who knows if Jesus really said this or if Jesus even existed, right? Let's assume he did. If he's saying that, he probably isn't giving up. He's beginning to chant the psalm. That's the whole point of it being a psalm. You didn't just read it in your devotions. No, these psalms were sung or chanted in the hour of one's extremity. And that's what's happening here. And it ends with faith, right? Still, I know it looks bad, but I know you're going to come through for me, God. Well, Luke rightly figured that some people aren't going to get that. So let me express Jesus's hope by a different psalm quote. What is this, from Psalm 63 or something? Let's just check. What are we looking for? Verse 46. Psalm 31:5. So Luke has replaced it with one that is a clear statement that any idiot can see. That he's saying, I'm entrusting my spirit to you. Like death has come. It's too late to avert it. I know I'm dying, but I commit my spirit to you. And could you bring this guy along? Okay. 47. Now, when the centurion, the Roman soldier in charge of the scene, right, of execution, when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God and said, certainly this man was, you expect him to say, the Son of God, right? Because that's what he does say in Mark and Matthew. But no, so this man was innocent. Now, why would Luke change that? Well, again, it's no mystery. Luke is trying to put the best face on formerly revolutionary Christianity, or at least to quiet the suspicions. Let's assume he was a pacifist, that he was Mahatma Gandhi the whole way through. Nonetheless, he's been charged with being a revolutionist. So either way, Luke wants to get that off the table. And he's had Pilate declare Jesus innocent. He's had one of the criminals on the cross say Jesus doesn't deserve this. And now the centurion says, well, they did get the wrong man. He was innocent. Less important in the circumstances than that he was the Son of God. No, he is innocent. Get it? Get it? Okay. 48. And all the multitudes who assembled to see the sight, when they saw what had taken place, returned home beating their breasts. In other words, they were stricken by this. They didn't say that bum from Galilee got what was coming to him. What a riot. Who's on the cross next week? No. Again, the crowd is grief-stricken at the outrage being done to Jesus here. So they leave, and all his acquaintances and the women who had followed him from Galilee stood at a distance and saw these things. Why a distance? Well, because if your leader just got crucified, you don't want to gather around him, because that means maybe you deserve crucifixion. If you got Che Guevara here on the cross and you're standing around wearing your Che t-shirts, which I can't believe anybody wears, they're going to think, well, let's grab the bunch of them now that we got them all together. They know that's a danger, and so they decide, let's keep our distance. We want to be able to see what happens. It kind of reminds me of Abraham standing at a distance looking at the cities of the plain going up in flame and smoke after God sent judgment on him. Okay, 50. Now there was a man named Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea. We don't really know where that was or if it was, though there is a town with a somewhat similar name, Ram something. But he's Joseph of Arimathea, right? He was a member of the council, a good and righteous man who had not consented to their purpose and deed, and he was looking for the kingdom of God. Looking for the kingdom of God, that is very much like the way Luke characterizes Anna and Simeon, these pious elderly Jews in Luke chapter 2. Yeah, 225. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, looking for the consolation of Israel. So it's the same idea. You're just watching the skies, waiting for the kingdom of God to come. And similarly, as we will see tomorrow, but let's cheat and take a fast look at it now. In 24, chapter 24, the Emmaus disciples, when Jesus approaches them incognito and says, "Why are you guys so glum?" And they say, "Don't you know the stuff that's happened in Jerusalem the past few days?" What do you mean? They said to him, "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a mighty prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and rulers delivered him up to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." These are all very similar statements, that they're cherishing the eschatological hope, the intervention of God to restore independence to Israel. And again in Acts 1:6, is it now that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? So these are Lucan signature terms there. And so Joseph was pious. He too, like Simeon, was looking for the kingdom eagerly. But he was a member of the Sanhedrin. Weren't they the bad guys in this case, condemning Jesus? Well, in Mark, it does not say he had any problem with the verdict against Jesus. He does request custody of the corpse so he can give it a decent burial, but that doesn't mean he didn't think Jesus was a false prophet. Remember, the book of Tobit is all about the chief charitable act for Jews to bury the dead when no one else will. If, they may not deserve a decent burial, but their fellow Jews, they're going to get a decent burial. And so Tobit is burying them left and right. And so it would make sense for Joseph, even if he thought, "Oh, this Jesus guy is deluded, but people like him are dangerous, bringing the Romans down on us." So, and it doesn't, and what does Mark say? They all voted him worthy of death. Well, if Joseph was there, he must have. And so now we find, given this tendency to get Jesus off the hook, that, oh, well, he didn't agree to the decision to condemn Jesus. So again, another one, the results are in from another quarter, that again, Joseph, though a Sanhedrinist himself, didn't go along with this. He knew Jesus was innocent. Get it? I mean, he's really slapping you in the face with this. Okay, and Verse 52, this man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then he took it down and wrapped it in a linen shroud and laid him in a rock-hewn tomb where no one had ever yet been laid. It was the day of preparation, and the Sabbath was beginning. This is not the day of preparation for the Sabbath. It's the day of preparation for the. I'm sorry, it's not the day of preparation for the Passover. That's already passed, but for the Sabbath, they had to make special arrangements for that, since you couldn't actually do ordinary duties on the Sabbath. Okay, we need to know this, that the Sabbath was beginning. The sun was about to go down on Friday night, and then that would initiate the Sabbath, which would then last until sundown on Saturday. Okay, the women, 55, the women who had come with him from Galilee followed and saw the tomb and how his body was laid. Then they returned home and prepared spices and ointments, to preserve the body. On the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandment. Now, this doesn't say that Joseph had put spices and unguents on the body. Apparently, he figured, well, I'll park the corpse in a rock-hewn tomb. Doesn't say it was his tomb, right? We're going to have the story elaborated more and more. But apparently he didn't have the time or whatever, the opportunity. But the women said, well, let's go home and get the stuff ready. And as soon as the Sabbath is over, we'll be back to give the body a decent treatment. And you know what's going to happen, right? So Joseph. Yeah, this might be a good place to mention that since Luke, more than anybody else, seems to use Josephus, like the scene of Jesus 12 years old in the temple, trading legal opinions with the scribes and so on. That looks just like a story in Josephus's autobiography, where he says when he was 14, he would go to the temple and the elders would ask him questions. He was such a know-it-all. And let's see. Well, the trial narrative, all of them may have gotten that from Josephus's account of Jesus ben Ananias. And in Acts, there's a reference to Theudas the magician and Judas of Galilee as previous revolutionaries, even though actually Theudas was after Jesus, not before. But that seems to come from a reading of Josephus. And let's see. Yeah, and the real interesting one for this chapter is that once Josephus, commander of Jewish rebel troops in Galilee, saw where the wind was blowing, he switched sides so that at least he could, intercede for Jews in the settlement of the thing. That's at least my guess as to why. And he was with Titus, who was the guy that did the mopping up operation. And he saw a whole mess of Jews crucified, rebel fighters and all that. And he suddenly noticed 3 of his assistants and friends, and they were still alive. And so he says, oh my God. And he goes to Titus and says, look, I it's kind of nervy asking this, but those guys are my friends. Is there any chance you would let them down from the cross and save their lives as a favor to me? Sure, why not? And he tells them hey, go get those guys off the cross and see to their wounds and so on. And 2 of them, it's too late. They're alive when they take them down, but not for long. But one of them does survive. Now, Does that have something to do with the gospel story here? Yeah, it does, because Josephus's whole name was Josephus uh, Bar Matthias, son of Matthias. If you take the B off, you got Armatheus. So is this like a wink to the reader that that's who this character was? Of course, the dating is wrong, but all you have to say is that they took the story and pushed it back into an earlier time. They're not trying to say Josephus the historian, but that's the real life prototype for the gospel character. And it explains why, even though they go out of their way to say there were three men crucified at the place of the skull, Jesus in the middle, and two other guys. And then we assume, well, later we're told that they both died, and that Jesus was thought to have died, but it turns out either he did die, but quicker than the other two, or maybe he wasn't dead. Pilate says, "What? He's dead already?" It's supposed to take a lot longer than that, and this would fit the swoon theory, right? That he was taken down alive from the cross. No need for a resurrection then. So there's a lot of interesting things that are percolating in this chapter. Hints of other versions combined with the Marcionite gospel, and bits taken out, omitted from the Markan material, and other items substituted, sort of splitting like using Barabbas as a literary scapegoat, saying that, there was a guy that answered to the accusations of the Sanhedrin, but it wasn't our guy. Well, maybe it was, because maybe that insurrection was the one that Jesus provoked in the temple, well, etc. Let's take a look at some erudite questioners. Peter Rabbit says today's Luke was thumbs up the similarities of the donkey and looking for the Last Supper. Is fascinating is the opposite use of Satan with Peter and Judas. Okay, thank you. And he also says, what are the various types of criticism, text, redaction, etc.? Yeah, good point. Their textual criticism is just the attempt to compare manuscripts and to try to weed out copyist errors and interpolations and so forth, and to try to get back to the earliest form of the text we can surmise. And it's difficult to do that. There's a lot of places. I mean, there's some that are very obvious, that are just stupid goofs, like leaving out a word and stuff like that. But it gets tricky when you got whole sentences absent from one bunch of manuscripts but present in another, and it's kind of evenly balanced. You don't really know which is the original there. And the people that footnote the Gospels are honest about that. They make an educated guess, but then they'll tell you in the footnote, this isn't absolutely certain because it reads this way in these other texts. And so they're trying to eliminate all of that stuff. And because of that, the 1946 publication of the Revised Standard Version New Testament, which I'm reading from, this provoked a lot of outrage among fundamentalists, because they were using many more and earlier manuscripts than the King James text had been based on. And it turns out that by comparison, you had sort of significant chunks that must have been added. One of them was in, I think it's John 5, where Jesus is at the pool of Bethesda, and where everybody's gathered around the central pool there, and waiting for the water to bubble up, which it did for some seismic reason. And they figured first one in gets healed of whatever troubles them. And this guy's lame. He can never get there in time. So why does he go there at all, etc.? And Jesus heals him. That's the story that's in the Gospel of John. And the story is in there, but there is a sort of longish explanation as to why they thought the pool bubbled occasionally. And they said, for an angel of the Lord used to come down invisibly and trouble the waters. And when people saw it, oh, there's the angel again, let's go, and sprinted toward the thing. Kind of a cruel joke, since you had a bunch of lame people trying to win the race. But that explanation, very likely that was the explanation, and that the evangelist knew it, but some scribe figured, I don't know if everybody's going to understand this. I'll just put a little marginal note in there. And he did, but the problem was, it wasn't clear that that's what it was. It's not an explanatory marginal note. Maybe it's something a previous scribe accidentally skipped, and he couldn't take the time and the money for the materials to start over again. So he just he took the explanation, which had originally been a part of it, and said, let me stick it in on the side with an arrow. That'll be clear enough. Like, we don't know which way it was. Was it an added explanation or a restored omission? Hard to say. Similarly, in Mark chapter 16, after verse 8, you have this ending that seems to be kind of condensed and copied from Luke 24 and other sources, and it has all the snake handling and the poison drinking. These signs will follow those that believe. They'll speak in tongues and so on. The rest of it, 9 through 20, it doesn't appear in any of the earliest manuscripts. And what do you have instead? Well, nothing, probably in the original, but there's but those extra verses appear in later manuscripts, and there are a couple of other endings that people tacked on because they thought, wait a minute, it can't end without a resurrection appearance. It can't end with the angel saying he has risen, but frightening the holy women out of their wits, and they run and tell no one. Whoa, wait a second. No appearances? Well, that can't be. And so people cooked up new endings. And actually, so did Matthew, Luke, and John, right? Because they're following the Markan outline up to that point of the empty tomb story. And so they make sure Jesus does show up, though the stories are very different. So textual criticism shows you tries to, where things are insecure in the text. And some of the earliest textual critics were fundamentalists, right? Because you think, well, a lot of fundamentalists don't like that. And that's why, as I say, fundamentalists, some of them burned the Revised Standard Version upon its first appearance. But others said, hey, if we believe in verbal inspiration, that God, in effect at least, dictated every word of the text. Now, if that's the case, we better make darn sure we have the actual inspired words. If somebody's fudged it, like Jeremiah said, the scribes did, we got to find out. We don't want to be obeying as the word of God what is some clown's self-inspired ideas. Not all are against that, and non-fundamentalists certainly are not against it. There is also source criticism. What was another one? The famous Trinity passage in 1 John. There are three that bear witness in heaven: the Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit. And these three are one. Sorry, not in any ancient Greek manuscript. Oh, or the woman taken in adultery, let him who is without sin be the first to cast a stone. Not in the earliest copies of John. It appears a couple of places in Luke. So obviously it was a free floating tradition that somebody had written down, but it was a scrap by itself. And someone figured this isn't going to survive long that way. Let's add it to one of the Gospels. Now, which one do you think it would fit best? So, textual criticism, controversial sometimes to some people, but necessary. Source criticism is where you say, okay, we got the text or as close to it as we're liable to get. And but there are contradictions and repetitions and discontinuities that seem kind of weird, but could be explained if you said each of these texts is not a consistently running narrative or collection of sayings. It looks like there's discontinuities in there that would fit if you had a text that was a compilation, a patchwork quilt. And so the ancient scribes compiled the Pentateuch and also the book of Psalms and various others. And so source criticism tries to divide, like the Pentateuch, into underlying source documents. J, the Yahwist account of the creation up through Moses. E, the Elohist account, one that starts with Abraham and goes on in through Moses. Then the priestly account, which overlaps a lot of that. It has a different creation account, but also goes through Moses, but with some different stories and retellings. Then D, the Deuteronomic source, which is most of the book of Deuteronomy, minus the preface that sort of summarizes the previous stories of Moses and the children of Israel. So you can kind of tell where different sources have been used because, wait a minute, this story is mighty similar to this one with a few differences. Well, were they going to choose between the versions? No. You'd outrage some people that knew and loved one particular set of stories. You got to have everybody's in there if you want an ecumenical scripture everybody can use. Or with the Gospels, you've got so much in common between Matthew and Luke, and a lot of it is held in common with both of them and Mark. But then there's another bunch of stuff that both Matthew and Luke have that Mark does not. So where did Matthew and Luke get that? Well, from a hypothetical Q source, etc. Because these are ways of kind of slicing up the pie to understand, where did this come from? Where did that come from? What can we surmise about the reasons for the difference, what the scribe who compiled it was trying to do, and what led to these weird things like Pharaoh, for instance. There's one of the stories where Abraham and Sarah go into Egypt or the Philistia. It's very much the same story, but with details differing. And Sarah is so beautiful that Abraham is rightly afraid that the king will say, hey, how much you want for this hot chick you're traveling with? Oh, she's my sister, by the way. Yeah, right. He says, well, then no obstacle to me, so I'm going to recruit her for my harem. Okay, because he knows that if they knew he was her brother, they would kill him to get her. So to save his own yellow hide, he pretends that Sarah is her sister, and if that means join in the harem of the king, well, that's okay. At least I come out unscathed. But then God tells the king, hey, keep your mitts off her. She's married to somebody else. Did you expect me to know that? And so forth. In one version, she actually is his sister, a kind of a half sister, so it's not such an outrage. Um, in another version, it's Isaac, not Abraham, but it's the same story, and so on and so forth. So you've got three versions of this. How come? Well, you say, well, they were all from different versions of different accounts of ancient Israel, and they have to be put together, but you can't leave anybody's favorites out, and so on and so on. Then form criticism is looking for different I don't want to use the word genre exactly. It's kind of that different types of oral tradition or written material that observes certain requirements, certain features that an epistle, an obvious example, a letter will have an opening, a salutation, then get into the body of it, and then some kind of closing and such. And most letters were very, very short on scraps of papyrus. And so when you have hugely long letters, as in the New Testament, you got to wonder yeah, this has the basic format of a letter, but it is so long. It makes you wonder if this is a treatise to which these closing and opening features have been attached, so you can say that this was really written by Paul or somebody else to a church. And so there's the signs of it being a letter, but it's really a treatise. You can understand things better that way. Or you notice with miracle stories in the Gospels and other ancient literature, there's a general stereotype outline. There's a setting. Where does this happen? Is there a crowd there? Whatever. Then you've got the case history. Why is there a plight, something that needs to be addressed and redeemed? It may be the woman with the hemorrhage approaching Jesus in the crowd and plugging into his battery of healing power, and she's healed. Or it may be the disciples are in a boat that's about to capsize, and they say, "Teacher, wake up, we perish." Or it could be that Jairus's daughter is on the verge of death, and then she dies, and so it's bad. Things are bad for one reason or another. So then they recruit the hero of the story to do something about it. And he gets there and he signals that he is going to do something. She is not dead, but only sleeps, etc., etc. And then he does or says something, some kind of a gesture that has the result of the effect of a magic formula. Talitha kumi, a little maid, I say to you, rise. Or Ephatha, be opened. And then there is skepticism by the bystanders. What do you mean she's asleep? She's dead. And he says, yeah, just wait and see. Well, he does the gesture. The person is healed or revived or rescued or whatever, and the crowd shouts their acclamation. Oh, we didn't think he could do it. This is amazing. This guy must have been sent by God, etc. And so on and so on. You always have this set form for a miracle story or a parable, a story within the story, right? Jesus told them this parable and so on. It's about imaginary characters to make a point about sin and salvation or whatever. And so on down the line. There are loads of different literary types that appear in the Bible, and some are to be taken as history, some are not. I mean, even the ones that are taken to be history may not be, but at least the writers wanted them to be understood that way. And then there's redaction criticism, which I've been doing a lot of on this series, where you say, I think I can separate the editing of the evangelist from the raw material he used. And that's very common. That means editorial criticism. And there are other kinds as well. But that is, once you get into that stuff, it is really fascinating, even exciting if you're a Bible nerd like me. Who did that one? Peter Abbott, which leads me to ask, are they simply being, as the writers of the Bible, simply being creative, or do they truly believe that what they're writing, or are they being intentionally deceitful? Are they taken in by things that are not historically true that they figure are? That's probably so. Do they know they're telling stories that are like fables from which you're to take a lesson, but it doesn't matter if they ever happened? Probably didn't, but the story is confronting you with a choice. I think so. There are certain passages that seem to me you can't really take literally, that they just work too well. And somebody must have designed them for that purpose. Are they trying to deceive? Well, sometimes, yeah, like the story of Ananias and Sapphira, where this couple has tried to follow the example of Barnabas, who sold some property and gave the proceeds to the apostles to distribute to the poor. And this guy got a lot of credit for that. And Ananias and Sapphira said, boy, we could use some admiration like that. Let's give a bunch of money to the apostles to distribute, and we'll say it was everything we had. But who knows about these guys? We may be a couple of fools, so let's keep back a nest egg of our own just in case. And but the Holy Spirit tells Peter, when they present the money they did bring in, they say, hey, don't be fooled. These guys try to pull the wool over your eyes. They kept back some of the money. And Peter says, who induced you to lie to the Holy Spirit? You didn't turn over all the money. And I'm afraid you're not going to have the chance to do something like that again. Zap! And they fall down dead. Now, as Loisy said, this is just a scare story to tell readers, whoa, I better not try something like that. You know, I don't want to defraud God and pretend that I gave all when I didn't. That certainly he knew he was making that up. Yeah. Just a man from the past. Gesundheit. Oh, thanks for that sneeze. Yeah. You know what Gesundheit means, right? Healthiness. So that's why they're saying it, right? He also, just a man from the past, also says, when a would-be Messiah was executed, what is the likely maximum of people who would have both known who he was and his story, and who would be present for the execution? Is the whole crowd expected to know? Well, you wouldn't, like with the placard business, the titulus, they called it, the title. It really wouldn't matter if you knew, and it sort of presumes you don't know. You're walking in from the fields outside the walls of the city, and you say, oh, look at these guys. I wonder what this guy did. Would be king of the Jews? Luckily, I don't have any such ambitions. Or thief. Yeah, I better resist the temptation, and so on. So that they wouldn't necessarily know these guys, but there were loads of them who were actually, if you listen to them in their audience, you would know they're supposed to be a Messiah. I think it's Lucian, who says there's loads of these guys who are going around saying, I am God. I am the Son of God. I am the Spirit of God. And they're all they're just a bunch of lunatics or charlatans. He's very skeptical. Or think of what Pilate says in Jesus Christ Superstar. Now, this is new. Respect for Caesar. Until now, this has been noticeably lacking. Who is this Jesus? Why is he different? You Jews produce messiahs by the sackful. And that's still the way it is today, I hear. So that wouldn't have been that striking. Oh, yeah, another one of these guys. Right. But probably people gathered for the execution. I'm sorry to say, just as curiosity seekers or for entertainment, God forbid, right? And like in the life of Brian, where Brian's mother takes him to a stoning, and but women are not allowed to attend. At least they say. I guess they're right. And so all the women have bought obvious false beards to try to pass as men, and they say crucify. I mean, crucify, and this is the famous scene where Matthias, son of Deuteronomy of Gath, is being stoned for using the name of God in vain. But all I said was, this halibut is good enough for Jehovah. Oh, there you go. You said it again. These guys just came there for an afternoon's entertainment, and they brought enough rocks with them. I can well believe that. Okay, Richard says it's similar to the scapegoat ritual. Yeah, that's right. The crucified, like in the Sacred King ritual, the king became the scapegoat. He bore the sins of his people, for which God had caused vegetation to die off in the fall and the winter. But if the king became the sin bearer and died symbolically by the humiliation by the high priest, then he could rise symbolically and restore vigor to the vegetation. It was a seasonal thing. And here, the way it's interpreted with Jesus' death, not so much in Luke, but in the other Gospels, he is the scapegoat, that the sins of the nation are transferred to him. Oh, let's see. Richard says, how did the two thieves crucified with Jesus know he was the Messiah? Well, they would have known he was supposed to be because of the placard up there. But how did the one know that he was? Well, somehow. Well, Luke doesn't really care. He just wants you to know that, hey, here is a guy that was a revolutionist. That's usually what laced robbers denoted in a case like this. And he figured, well, this guy isn't like the likes of us. He, for some reason, he said he's innocent. Maybe he had heard about the interchange between Pilate and Herod. I mean, maybe that's what Luke thought, but somehow it doesn't matter. Luke's only point is that he saw through the charade and knew Jesus was innocent. Maybe because it takes one to know one, or to know that someone is not one. I don't know, but it doesn't really matter. He just wants to have yet another competent witness say, "Oh no, Jesus is not guilty," and we don't know any more beyond that. Oh, Aaron Zach, what's the whole story of Saint Helen and the true cross about? Was it a 4th century archaeological expedition of finding the true cross? Did this story have a certain political agenda behind? Well, not that I know of, but she was Constantine's mother and was a zealous convert, and she wanted any kind of souvenirs, or the holy term for it is relics, of the events of the Gospels. I don't know if she was trying to bolster faith by saying, "You think this is a myth? Well, I happen to have a piece of the true cross right here," as if you could prove it, right? And but it was an attempt at a kind of an archaeology, but of the flimsiest kind. You just check around. What are people saying? Hey, do you have any idea where Jesus was buried? Oh, yeah. Well, here's one place they say it happened, but there's another one there. Or where was Golgotha? I know about it from the Bible, but I don't have a map or anything. Oh, right over there. Or right over there. There were a couple of sites for that. And actually, things hadn't changed much in a couple of thousand years, because you had William Foxwell Albright, famous biblical archaeologist, and others like him who pursued the same thing. They said, well, now the Bible says Solomon had a temple here, or had a gold mine here, or a bunch of boats moored here, his navy. And if you find anything that could possibly be that, bingo, we found it. And that continues till today, but it's just a shot in the dark. There's no way to show it. It's not like these guys would have been the only ones who did have a harbor full of boats, or a temple, or whatever. Peter Rabbit, it's fascinating how the crowds alternate between loving, cheering, and grieving Jesus versus the crowd which yells for him to be crucified. Yeah, but in Luke, remember, you have to assume that it's simply the Sanhedrin, the people that have accused Jesus, a small group of clergy. It doesn't say, I mean, anytime it mentions the crowd, it's crowds of Jesus followers mourning for him or protesting his innocence or whatever. It just seems that the ones who howl for the blood of Jesus are simply the Sanhedrinists. They're the ones that are threatened by his continuous existence. Okay, thank you, Gandhi. Lestes, yeah. So, thief implying rebel. Oh, thank you, Peter. I'm embarrassed reading this, but what the heck? I guess I could use the PR. Dr. Price, you're better than any college professor around. Yeah, used to be one. But boy, I don't have to grade stuff and such. I much prefer the geek life. Roger Sacco says, I think Jesus was just telling the thief on the cross that today he's assuring him he'll be remembered, not when he comes in the future kingdom. Well, yeah, the Seventh-day Adventists who believe in the soul sleep theory, which I think is in the New Testament. I mean, the fact that they call the dead those who sleep, doesn't that kind of mean they're out like a light, but they won't be forever, right? But this story seems to me to be saying, yeah, we'll meet again very shortly now in paradise. And the whole idea of paradise, it was an alternate view. The righteous are alive unto him. But the resurrection of the righteous has not yet happened. But if you believe that, yeah, the soul sleep theory is the only one, Christian mortalism, it's called sometimes, when you die, you're not just going to be asleep. I mean, that would almost make the resurrection of the just into another version of the swoon theory, right? You're not really dead. You're just going to awaken later on resurrection morning. But it does seem to me that the existence of the category of paradise implies that there's no one regnant view here. But what they're doing is to take the today, I say to you, you will be with me in heaven as today, or like people say, I'll tell you right now. you're going to be with me in heaven. That seems to me to twist the text, but who knows? It's possible. You can never really be sure with this stuff. Boy, I know people sort of don't like to hear that. And what are we bothering with this stuff then? Well, it's important to see what it might mean, since sometimes people use the Bible as a club to enforce conformity of belief. And it's worth noting that they may not have grounds to be so sure of what they're saying. Imagine some dogmatizing pulpiteer, um, like on the question of homosexuality. And if somebody really knew all the fine nuances of and all the different factors that go into treating the very few apparent biblical references to homosexuality, I can imagine the preacher dealing with this saying, brothers and sisters, I want you to know that there's 45% chance that God is against homosexuality. You can't be very dogmatic if you admit that the odds are about even and all that. Well, people don't want that. They don't want uncertainty. They wouldn't be reading the Bible in the first place. Okay. Dakus Dava. Was there apocalyptic literature before the book of Daniel? Yeah, I think there was. I'm guessing that Zechariah, which has apocalyptic elements, that was certainly a bit before the Hasmoneans. It seems to come from the so-called Deutero-Zechariah, later addition to the book, but earlier than the situation envisioned in Daniel's prophecies about the Hasmonean victory over the Seleucids and so forth. I believe there are something like ancient Egyptian apocalyptic works that are much older too. Okay. Aaron Zach, does the New Testament mention any cross worship or veneration? Let's see. I don't think so. I don't believe so. That's an interesting question. Yeah, I think early on they would have said that's just idol worshiping. Yeah, I mean, how about in the Gospel of Peter, a resurrection narrative in which Jesus is shown coming out of the tomb on Easter morning, being upheld by a couple of angels, and he's gigantic in form. His head reaches beyond the sky and so forth, and then a cross comes out, and a heavenly voice says, have you preached to the spirits in prison? He says, yes. The cross is an intelligent agent. You're on your way to cross veneration there, I would think. Let's see. Aaron says, was Stephen actually a Christian? Well, they say that in Acts that he was one of the 7 so-called deacons or ministers who were to see to the distribution of food to the consecrated widows in the congregation, which is probably an anachronism. In the dawn age of Christianity, they wouldn't have yet adapted that institution from Judaism. And he certainly seems to be a big fan of Jesus, right? And has a vision of him as he's dying and all that. Now, I like the question, was Stephen really Stephen? Because Robert Eisenman argues quite compellingly to me that this is a retelling of the Josephus and Hegesippus accounts of the martyrdom of James the Just in the temple. I think he's probably right. Stephen actually means crown, which indicates he's what Todorov called a narrative man. He's a cipher of a character who is merely in there to take a particular narrative role. And so the guy who was the first martyr, he receives the crown of martyrdom. Let's call him Crowny. Yeah, boy. So I would assume he was, unless he was James the Just, who was supposed to be a Christian by this point. Luke says so, but who really knows? Because he's hostile to Jesus earlier. Well, that, I think, my friends, is about it for today. Wow. Was Julius, oh, here's one. Was Julius Caesar an anti-Semite? I think I was talking to somebody about that yesterday. I doubt it seriously. Romans were friends of Jews unless there happened to be a Jewish revolt going on, but that wasn't the case in Caesar's time. Okay, well, yeah, okay, I will be seeing you tonight at 6 for another exciting Bible Geek, and then tomorrow we will at noon finish the Gospel of Luke, amazingly. And oh, by the way, Carol and I are about to put together my new book, The Heresy of Paraphrase, and I think you'll really get a kick out of that. It'll be available on Amazon and I think Barnes and Noble and others as well. It's all finished in the writing, but we got to format it and send it to, and get some cover art and so on. And I know you're going to like it. We're going to have loads of questions and answers on that by itself. So I'll bid you adieu and see you next time.